To understand Linux better, let's just go back in time. From 1940s all the way till 1970s, computers were not like what we see today. They were huge, sometimes as big as a room, and extremely expensive. Not only that, but there was another major problem. Each computer was built for a specific purpose, and each one of them used a completely different kind of operating system, which that meant software was not compatible across systems. System administrators had to learn different environments for each machine, and for normal users, it was almost impossible to even access or understand these systems. So, in simple words, computing was not for everyone. It was limited only to large organizations, governments, and universities. And later on in 1969, a team of developers at Bell Labs came up with a solution. They created a system called Unix. Unix introduced a completely new way of thinking. It had three major advantages. It was simple and elegant. It was written in the C programming language instead of assembly, and it allowed code to be reused across systems. Before Unix, every hardware system needed its own custom-built software. But Unix changed that. Because it was written in C, it could be adapted across different machines using a core component called the kernel, which this made it much easier for software vendors to develop and distribute software without rewriting everything for each new hardware system. That's one of the main reasons Unix was adopted so quickly. But even Unix wasn't a problem-free software. To access Unix, you needed access to powerful machines, which is called mini-computers. And that usually meant you had to work in universities, government institutions, or large companies. So even though Unix was powerful, it was still not accessible for ordinary people. By the late 1980s, personal computers, or what we know as PCs, started becoming available for home usage. But the software people were using, like MS-DOS and Windows 3.1, was limited, slow, and paid. At the same time, Unix still existed, but it had become expensive, closed source, and controlled by strict licensing, which students and developers could not freely study it, modify it, and experiment with it. There was also another system called Minix. Minix was Unix-like, but it was created only for teaching purposes. In other words, it was not designed for real-world use and had limitations that made deeper experimentation difficult. Around the early 1990s, something important changed. Personal computers or PCs became powerful enough to run a real operating system, which this created the perfect opportunity. That's when Linus Torvalds, a computer science student at the University of Helsinki, had an idea. He wanted a freely available version of Unix, something people could use, study, and improve without restrictions. So he started building his own system. In 1991, he released the first version of the Linux kernel. So Linux today gets its name from two parts. Lin, which is the short for Linus, and UX is derived from Unix. So Linux literally means Unix-like system, which is created by Linus. What started as a small personal project coded from a student's room later became one of the most important operating systems in the world. A simple way to understand this is Unix was like a locked library which you could use it, but you couldn't freely access or modify it. On the other hand, Linux was built so everyone could read, learn, and write their own books, which Linux is called a Unix-like operating system. This means it follows the same design principles as Unix, like directory structures, which later on I'll explain, and system behavior, but it contains zero Unix code. And this was done deliberately to avoid licensing issues while still keeping the power and philosophy of Unix. And this is how Linux was born, not just as an operating system, but as a solution to accessibility, freedom, and learning. But creating Linux was not easy. Linus Torvalds asked a lot of questions and looking for answers and solutions that would help him get Unix on his PC. Below is one of his first emails dating from 1991. So in simple words, Linux is an operating system like Windows and Mac OS, but it is free, open source, and everybody could customize that as they want, which is why we have a lot of distribution in Linux, which I'll explain in next chapter.